Oh, I don't have those. I don't have the delts and the lats that
Oh,
It only looks
that
like
this
it
cheap.
because I still have a pump going on from my shoulder session last night. I promise.
Oh, okay.
They're
All
not
right.
usually like that.
The only thing that has a pump for me right now is my eyelids from how hard I've slept since I got back from out west in Zambia. I had my freaking Fitbit. I think I was like 10 hours and 34 minutes, which normally that's at least 2 to 3 days worth of sleep, but
Mm-hmm.
not when I'm in the I don't know, early season rundown. I'm down, I
Yep.
think I was like 198. So I'm down 12 or 14 pounds already.
Jeez.
oh, I didn't even realize you hit record.
Yeah,
Well,
well, get
hi
with the
guys.
freaking program. We're on a podcast. Why am I the guest? Like recognizing the details here.
I don't know, dude. You're just a little wiser. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Hoyt Bowhunting podcast. We got John Dudley back with us today.
Yes,
He is fresh
unsettled
back.
business.
You just heard him crying about being tired and sleeping and
Yeah.
everything
Yeah, because he gets to go to
Well,
Africa and
because
hunt Cape.
he was hauling Cape Buffalo on his back and
not
whatnot.
true.
He lost too much weight.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, eating bacon and peanut butter in the bush was
There you
pretty
go.
awesome. But no,
Yeah.
actually, my favorite thing that I ate was hippo and puku.
What
I
is a
had a
puku?
hippo stew that was unbelievable, and then a puku is like I don't even know how to describe what they really look like. I mean, it's kind of I don't know, a red, fuzzier version of an impala with smaller impala horns.
Hmm.
You'll have to look up what a puku is, but
Yeah.
the puku steaks were freaking unreal. And I drove by puku a lot because they're kind of like a little bit smaller animals, and I was just like, no, I'm good because I've hunted a lot of plains game before,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know, really focused on the buffalo. So spent a lot of time on the buffalo hunt, and that I think that ended up eating up like 5 days or something like that. The buffalo and sable ended up eating up, I think, like 8 of my 14 days. So
Now, was that because you were after a specific bull, or because you were looking for just something unique in either size or age, or
no. So the place where I went, very, very good pHs, but also very focused on conservation, and they work
Mhm.
very, very close with the government. So, like some of the stuff that I hunted, we actually had to have, I don't know what they'd be called, but it's almost like a Zambian ranger that was literally had to be there. They had like old AK-47s, so they're literally like looking for, for poachers and stuff like that. So like they had to be with me a lot, but we were really looking for, because they're really trying to they're really trying to like grow Zambia into this amazing ecosystem for African game and really get it back to where it was. And the effort by hunters on a lot of these concessions is what's making a lot of this possible, even paying for a lot of these, poacher hunters, I guess, or
Mhm.
paying some of the salaries for these guys. But they really wanted to focus. The buffalo is like on the way back,
Mm.
and the herds are really growing. But one of the rules, my PH kind of told me, he's like, if you're okay with this, we really want to focus only on the Dugga boys, finding grown males that are out of the breeding herds and kind of lone and on their own. And what I didn't realize about that, and a reason why that's so critical to conservation practices there, is the natural defense of the Cape Buffalo herds is those older bulls that are within the herds, when they pack together, and the big bulls surround those groups and literally protect them. And when you take these dominant males out of the breeding herd, then you have a negative impact on conservation. So, certainly there were some giants in these breeding herds where, maybe you could have got in there and cherry picked them. But, I guess from my perspective, the conservation aspect was just a very, very clear and logical reason why we needed to find these lone satellite dudes that were just out of the pack and out of that breeding herd and out of the fight. But mine was just an ancient warrior, which was, even better. But I think it's somewhat safer too to not be in, a full herd of those things, because listen, when my when the new bows come out and I'm able to show the footage, it's some of the most awesome footage I think I've ever captured, because we got in, I think it took us 3 days before I finally got a shot opportunity. And it was an amazing hunt. I have a whole new perspective, a whole new appreciation, and a whole new passion for it, truthfully, because got in, they're extremely leery. Any chance of like seeing you and not knowing what you are, they're gone. Any smell, they're either gone or immediately the switch is flipped to where they're ready to kill you. Um, so things didn't work out for a few days. Not, and I really wanted a close, great, perfectly broadside shot opportunity. Like, don't risk anything with these suckers. Um, so once we got on the group and found a bull that I really liked, when things weren't right, we would back out, and then the tracker would pick up on that track the next day, and we might follow that for miles, and the tracking ability is like unheard of. I mean, I've tracked thousands of animals using blood and some tracks, but it's not even like,
They
I
can
wouldn't
dry
even call
track.
myself a tracker compared to what these got. The track is called the spore, and they can tell everything about it, and they can see it in things that our eye would never, ever, ever be able to see. Um, but we got in there. I made a shot. This must have been a very old bull that had tore his two buddies up for quite a while. But when he gets smashed by an arrow, goes down, and I don't know, less than 14 seconds, he was on his back. I mean, I literally cut the heart off the valves and then both lungs down for the count, just like fast. Once those other two saw that, the power show begins, and it was like, what some turkeys do when their buddy goes down. I mean, imagine 9,000 pounds of fury at 25 and 30 yards in front of you, and they literally picked this sucker up on his feet and made him fight, and threw him around like a foam rag doll. It was insane.
Nature is vicious, man.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
no empathy.
No.
No.
I can't believe anything lives through the night where I was. I mean, every night something dies. I mean, every night. I've been putting some stuff on my story that was pretty awesome. But I shot one of the new bows at 74.5 pounds. And I had a pretty cool setup too. I can't show it to you because it's over there, but I had 2 arrows in my quiver. So I had my axis that I normally run with 50 grains of brass and 100 grain T2 on the front. And then I had a dangerous game with double 75s in the front, and just a cut on impact, straight cut on impact head. And
How heavy is that arrow, John?
it's like 850 grains. So there's about 300 grains difference between the 2 arrows. But what I did was, on the side of my riser, I just wrote in marker 20 honestly, 20 equaled 41 on my sight for my axis. 30 was 53, then it was 66, and then it was 78. So I was 20 to 50. I just used those marks from my axis and just had that graph written on the side, which worked out really good because, you know, there was times we were looking specifically for a cape and I had an opportunity for an animal where I really needed, you know, the speed and the distance. I shot a roan that I haven't posted yet, but I shot a roan with a bow, which is very, very, very rare. And that was, it was it was a hard shot at like 72 yards, but you know, they're very fast, they're big, they're very dangerous too. So that slower arrow just wouldn't have been a great choice. You know, it just would have been way too much lob, too much reaction time. So yeah, it was an awesome trip and real testimony to this new bow. Like the PHs over there see so much stuff go down, they see so much stuff react, and just this, you know, the string noise, your ability to draw without added movement. These are all really important things for, you know, when you're doing spot and stalk hunting. Mine was all fair chase, open country spot and stalk. And a lot of times you were pretty dang exposed. So, I mean, you really had to be slow in your movement, drawing back. And there were times where I had to let down. So like with the newer, you know, cam system, it was pretty dang sweet, you know.
Pretty
So
comfortable.
I was pumped. I want to talk about it, but I'm, you know, got this gag order until November 13th.
What kind of speed are you getting out of that axis setup?
302.
Mm.
Yeah, I think my axis is right at like 99 or 98 foot-pounds. I never checked what the heavier arrow is. You know, funny enough, that math never gets too far off. It's just, you know, it's just a matter of having more energy behind that thing on something that big. I buried like right to the knock. I actually hit the knuckle on the opposite side. But it was perfect. I mean, it was like there was I forget what those birds are called that kind of give you away. That's one thing that screwed us up. You know, the first day we actually got in on these guys that were bedded, we were right there. And then when the one stood, you know, I went to draw and those birds that are on them kind of
Started
flushed.
squawking.
Yeah, they flushed and squawked. And then, you know, they alert animals to like danger, right? So, you know, whether it's a lion or a cat or whatever. So just that, you know, that kind of raised all the antennas. And then once you're doing a, you know, stare down for 30 minutes, you're going to get busted eventually. So, but no, it was like the perfect setup for me. I think if I ever go back, those two arrows are going to be in my quiver, and I'm going to have one that I'm getting some speed with and one that I can, you know, really be able to laze, know the exact distance, set that sight specifically. You know, I wouldn't have wanted multiple pins where I was worried about a pin gap at that slower speed because you just have too much room for error. But this was like a perfect setup. I had a 2-pin boonie sight, and like I said, had that little cheat sheet written clearly on the side of the riser, and it worked awesome.
Dude, I love that sight.
Is that what you're using now?
Yeah, the boonie. Yeah, I love it. I'm not using the 2-pin version, but
Which one are you using?
the 5-pin.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
Okay.
We
Yeah.
can't get him off that, John. I can't
No,
even,
dude,
I
it's
can't even get him
ingrained.
to try a 3-pin.
It's ingrained. It's been ingrained forever, and I don't have to process anything. It just, you know, I know what they
I
are.
agree with that.
Yeah.
I made a
And
big mistake, and I honestly never wanted to make it again. So when I switched over from my old Sherlocks and I had those old Lethal Weapon heads, like I had some original ones that Steve made for me that I had a 4-pin setup in there, And honestly, all my originals were built on a Worm Gear Supreme, kind of before those came out. And I got 6 of them, and that's what I shot like through all my Hoyt, honestly, all my Hoyt stuff up until the very last, I think till 2019. And then I switched over to Spot Hog, and I liked what you were talking about, Danny, the 5-pin. And so I actually drew a Utah tag, and I shot a bull through the back straps because of autopilot. And I
Yeah.
lost that bull, and it was one of these deals where came spotted the bull with a spotter, came over this rise, and the bull was in full velvet too. And he was like, I lased him, it was 50 yards. I mean, just like
Yeah.
5-0 bang on. I kind of came over the hill, ranged his back, and I'm just like, oh my God, oh my God, this is so. And I drew back and then came over, and just autopilot was bottom pin
Yep.
spot on. And as
Yep.
soon as my release went off, I could see by that arrow climbing, I was like, you have 5 pins, that's 60.
Yes.
I put my 60-yard pin on him versus the 50, mainly because now I've added this 5th pin into my equation that for 2 decades was
You didn't
never
have
in.
it.
Not there. Yep.
And I was like, you know what? I need to go either totally different, or I got to like go to a
Yeah.
4.
Yeah.
And I had asked Spot Hog if they would make a smaller housing 4,
Mhm.
which wasn't in the cards. So then I'm like, you know what? I'm going to learn my 2
Yeah. Learn new
instead
system.
of going to the 5. I wouldn't want all the dead space if I took the pin,
Yeah.
the
Out.
5th out of there to give me my old 4.
Mm-hmm.
But I understand where you're coming from the purpose of like autopilot.
Yeah.
Don't try to reprogram the
Yeah.
old programming. Like
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
our Commodore 64s don't work with the new iOS system.
Dude, I shot over a bull that ducked the string on me this year. Biggest bull I've ever had in front of me with a bow in my hand. And I mean it's going to crush me forever, but it's like if the animal follows a script and it comes in just exactly where you think it's going to come and does everything, and you have the time to think about it and everything, you'll be okay. But when the
Mhm.
panic button gets pushed, like it did on me,
Most of the
because I
time.
had a
Yeah.
I had a spike that was walking into my wind, and he got my wind and exploded, and the whole thing went to crap. And it's all do it now, do it now, do it now. You you are going to go back to whatever your autopilot is,
Yeah.
dude. And
Mhm.
if I change to a 3, if I change to a 2, any of those things, it's going to require more thought of me in that moment. And if there's one thing 38 years of doing this has taught me, is that I'm not capable of thinking during those moments,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not capable of it. Yeah, I've tried to overcome that, but it's just not in me, and I need to go with whatever comes most naturally and requires
Yeah.
the least thought. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I'll tell you one thing that I did with the 2, and you know, um, kind of credit to Cam Haynes. Cam shot a 2 for a long time, and I got asked a million times, why do you shoot a 4 and Cam shoots a 2? And I always just said, this is what I've always shot. That was what he always shot. And I always kind of thought like a 2 is just going to be problematic for me,
Mhm.
in especially as a whitetail hunter, when things, right now, I'm sure we're going to talk whitetail, or at least we better.
That was
yeah.
that was the plan, but
Because it's the end of October, so obviously, this is game time, and 2 pins in the Midwest whitetail rut, I was always like, this is not a good idea.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, I improvised on that, and I've actually got a very good system that I like better once I like made that conversion. And like I said, I didn't do the 5 or the 3 because of my programming that I had for so long on the 4.
Mm-hmm.
that I'm like, you know what, the 2 makes sense. I can shoot the 2 for tack, and I call myself a hybrid archer now. I like really like to have my tack setups a hybrid system to where really the only thing I'm changing is the weight of the arrow for tack. I don't change anything else about the setup other than I go with a little bit lighter arrow just so I can get some of those longer distances and have a little bit less wind drag at some of those longer shots. And I'm not steering a broadhead. So that's why I have just a slight variation in my arrow. But what I do is by having an arrow that can get you, honestly, 288 is a really good number. 290 is a really good number for bow hunters. And I think with the efficiency of compound bows right now, too many people are trying to have a real heavy arrow. I just think and yes, there's benefits to it. Sure, you're going to get a pass through, but honestly, for me, trauma equals blood on the ground more so than a pass through with a small cutting diameter.
Right.
That's from hundreds of track jobs. And, that's just my feeling. I'm taking trauma, period. But with my bow, when I have my sight set on 24 yards, my top pin's at 24, my second pin is at 40, and the top of my bubble is actually 50. So,
Okay.
I mean, you guys can think
What'd
of
you say the top pin was? 24?
24. Yeah. And honestly, I think if I were to only have one pin in my bow as a whitetail hunter, I would probably choose like 30 yards.
30.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say if I had one pin, it would be 30. But having that 24, 40, and then a bubble reference at 50, I mean, I'm
You're
pretty
you're
damn solid on the
covered.
fly. I mean,
Yeah.
you can think about if you go out and spend one afternoon on your 3D range on a mule deer Mackenzie target, which is equal to like what a whitetail would be, you can go to 20, you can go to 34, and you can know what that top pin's doing all the way through that thing on a fly like that. And then if you need to do anything at 40, you've got one quick. If you had a follow-up shot fast at 50, you can make it happen. Otherwise, anything
You
past
dial it.
40, take the time and be precise on that top pin. It's a
Yep.
good setup. I'm really happy with where I'm at right now on like my little combination, and I guess my subconscious programming right now is really good.
Yeah. How do you like the vertical aspect of that 2-pin setup versus uh, the pins coming in from the side?
I always have preferred that,
You have.
as a target archer, you just, learning to post, and especially once you've overcome any type of target anticipation or target panic, a lot of people with an up pin, they actually hit low a lot because they'll do what a lot of pistol shooters do is they'll actually post
Mm.
where they'll put the target right over the top of the pin
Right.
versus like
Right.
actually learning to cover it. Which is a mistake people make in a blind, if they don't have a lighted pin.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's easy to post because you're dark, you're coming up where you can
Yeah.
see light, and then there's two legs there, and next thing you're coming up, and then boom, you're shooting, but you haven't really got the pin
Got
on
yeah.
there yet. So once I was comfortable with that, I really prefer the up pin, because what I tell people whenever I'm presenting my pin to an animal, I'm always looking for the V in the legs, whether it's,
Hmm.
this would be a head-on shot, but
Yeah.
even, broadside,
Yeah. Like,
depending on how they're split, I
yeah.
always bring my pin up through the split because the
Mhm.
heart is between the legs.
Hmm.
So depending on, which angle they are, if you come up through that V to the lower third, I mean, you're aiming at heart all the time.
Right.
So that's just my thought process to it. And it's worked really well. Just,
Mm.
I had more lefts and rights when I had, the pins that
Horizontal.
came from the side.
Well, let's dive into whitetails a little heavier.
Get in there.
Evan had kind of outlined a few things that we wanted to talk about, and let's talk about the phases of the rut and the one that we're in right now, which is my least favorite.
Right now?
Yes, I'm not an October guy, man.
Well,
I'm not.
Okay, this is a perfect discussion though, because I'm doing this right now.
yeah,
Oh, I
and
know.
These
Well,
next 5 days are arguably my favorite, definitely in my top 3.
yeah. So pre-rut, right? We are smack dab in the middle of pre-rut. So scrapes are showing up.
Yep.
They are super active. Bucks are starting to be more territorial and going into those areas where they're going to be getting into doe bedding areas. In that pre-rut phase, because I'm like Danny, I've never spent the time to go hunt it because
well, I've hunted it.
I've got limited time, right? I want to hunt when it's hotter, but
Not temperature wise, by the way, if
exactly.
you're listening.
And that's one thing I want to talk about with this pre-rut phase is there's a lot of guys who really love it. You know, Midwest Whitetail had an absolute killer October last year because there was a cold front that hit right around the 24th or 26th, and I happened to be out in Kansas on that same cold front, and the best activity I have ever seen in my life hunting was last year, the 27th to the 1st on that cold front.
Yep.
When I look at weather right now, like where I grew up, they're mid 70s going into the low 80s for the next 9 days. So, looking and knowing, John, that we're in pre-rut and the activity level that's going on right now, talk to us about what your plans and preparation are for in the pre-rut when it comes to the weather that you're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell everybody, this has served really well for me over the years. I'm not usually very focused at all in early October. Like if I lived in a state where we opened in September, which we did when I lived in Wisconsin, very different discussion. Or whitetail opens in August or early September, like Alberta, Montana. You've seen me kill velvet deer. Definitely, on my whitetail radar. Though that time, early October, unless you have one bang on patterned, I honestly have way more value letting crops come down and letting neighboring pressure make the small hunting places that I have here in the state better. And some of the places, honestly, I just like book through land trust, which is like, a B&B for hunting properties.
Mm-hmm.
I might be in this area and then find a place where I can hunt 2 or 3 days. But funny enough, I don't ever really look at the temperature
Okay.
so much as moon and times. So I tell people when they're looking to book a hunt for the Midwest, and this comes from, a lot of experience of me when I worked at Matthews and had 5 days vacation and had to figure out how to hunt the Midwest. Um, I would either want Halloween week, which is honestly the 25th to 26th is normally when I am loading whitetail gear in my truck, and I am definitely like, I can tell you this afternoon, every single one of my cameras is going to get a fresh card and fresh batteries, every single one. And tomorrow I start, and I'm going to start in the mornings. And what I look for these later times is areas where bucks traditionally are doing scrapes or rubs. I'll be in those places in the mornings. Right now, late October. Which this year this is not the case. If the full moon is approaching at the end of October, which typically it does. It just passed, which
Mhm.
honestly, the reason why I credit a lot of people that had success here in the Midwest last week was the full moon was coming up prior to dark. Those 3 days where the moon is coming up on the horizon before the sun is exiting, those 3 days prior to the full moon during the late October time period is my favorite October days. And
Mm.
it's going to be an evening hunt and be on a food source. And there's going to be big deer for the first time, nose checking, monarch does that are there.
Hmm.
There's also a small window of time that can happen during that, which is like, I was really fortunate to grow up next to Gary Clancy. And Gary Clancy had a journal his whole life. And Danny, you know Gary Clancy, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Anybody who's seen the first 10 Monster Bucks video knew Gary Clancy, just an amazing Midwestern guy that had an extreme amount of data, written down. And he thought that this little mini rut that happened in October was all, and there was like a 3-day window of time where traditionally he saw the biggest deer of the season in this small 3-day window. And he always said it would be when the first old monarch doe would actually come into estrus early. A lot of times that would be triggered by that, in my opinion, just based on what the moon was doing, that full moon. I really look for those times. Some of my biggest deer, honestly, the biggest deer I shoot come during 3 times. They either come during Halloween week, which I love hunting pre-rut. Love it.
Mm-hmm.
Then, even I've got one of my good friends, Andy Stumpf, drew a tag.
Mhm.
He wanted to be here November 1. Like everybody that wants to book a hunt, I told him, do not. Can we have a good hunt? Yes. Chances are you're going to hit the lockdown. We can either see every deer within 3 miles of here on one doe, or we're going to see zero.
Mhm.
So you kind of either need to hit it before that first doe or two comes in, or you need to like be after those first main does have been hit and the bucks have actually got some action. And now they're truly continual day walkers. The late October window that I'm talking about, that is the first time a day walker will appear. Then they go reclusive again, and they're going to leave their reclusive area. They're going to go grab that first girl that they knew when she was coming in when they checked during these next few days right now. They're going to grab her and they're going to take her to a secure place, and that's going to be it. And once they've done that a time or two and all the other ones are coming in, that's now when they're zigzagging everything and they're going all the time and all over. But that typically, at least here in the Midwest, is going to come like after the 7th, 8th. And there's an awesome window in there. Honestly, like I would pick my second window would be like the 8th to the 16th.
That's
If
my
I only
favorite.
had 3 days, I would say pick a 3, and you want to shoot a true giant and you don't have one on your property, then I'm going to go a week later and say, when I've hunted farms that don't really have big deer on them, if I'm going to see a big deer on them, it's going to be a stray loner, and that'll come right around Thanksgiving. There's always a 3 to 4 day window right around Thanksgiving where there are some cruisers and bruisers that you will never see except for that window of time. And surpass that, then the opening week of late season, if that weather is there and if you have food, those are my 3 favorite times to hunt deer. Like if I had only 2 weeks to pick, I'd carve out 4.5 days right now. I would carve out 7, right there kind of in the middle. And then I would either, depending on how that went, I would save some for the opener of the late season, or I would save a day or two right slap there in that Thanksgiving period. that's my play. And
I want to take you back to a comment that you made a minute ago that I'd never heard before.
yeah.
The part about the moon, the full moon, and specifically about it rising prior to dark
Mm-hmm.
during a 3-day period. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
because everything conventional that I've ever heard about full moon is that you're more likely to see movement during the middle of the day. I hadn't
You
ever really
do.
paid attention to that. Traditionally for me, mornings and evenings have sucked during a full moon. Every now and again, there's an anomaly that happens, but it's sucked for me during the full moon. And I'd never heard that specifically about the moon rising before it got dark during that particular period of time. Can you explain the theory behind that and kind of what you mean?
I've killed a lot of deer, and the first thing I try to find is where the moon was during that time, or when I
Hmm.
see movement, like peak movement. And there isn't a lot of studies on the whitetail aspect of it that were great. Honestly, like Jeff Murray had some of the original Moon Guide stuff, but
Hmm.
there were like in my opinion, there were the parts of the equation, but the equation really wasn't truly solved.
Okay.
Hmm.
Now, I did look up a really cool study based on bass fishing, and a lot of times, when it comes to a lot of conservation efforts, um, there's not always a lot of big studies on whitetail deer or elk. It's kind of like waterfowl traditionally have had a tremendous amount of studies because it's a migrating bird, um, and fish, tons on fish. A lot of the bites are really attributed more so to the minor phase of the moon, not the
Hmm.
major. A lot of people in the hunting industry say major, major. Um, the major movement isn't technically the major movement. The easy part of this equation, and what I look for all the time, is when the moon, if you're looking at our horizon, anytime the moon is from 10 to 20 degrees up to 50 degrees on either side of the horizon,
Rising
regardless
or
of the
setting.
time, the animals stand with that and they're doing their thing. And so when you talk about this full moon, like once a moon actually peaks, and now, like I said, my favorite evening sits any month is the 3 days prior to a full moon. When that moon is coming up as the sun is setting, I am definitely in an evening spot
Mm.
because, and a lot of times, if depending on the time of year, if you're on food, you'll see deer feeding at that time. Now, as the moon becomes fuller and it starts to, you're walking out of your stand and that moon's, you're driving home and you get to see the big harvest moon.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then all of a sudden, like those next few days, you realize, wait a minute, it's dead in the mornings and I'm starting to see movement at like 11 or 12 o'clock, right? That moon is, find it. It's sometimes very hard to see, but you'll see it setting
Mm.
the moon will be setting during that time. And so that's what I'm saying. It doesn't matter which side of that horizon it's on.
Mm.
And I actually described this to the PHs because we were approaching a full moon and we had had a few slow days, and when I saw it come up, I go, they're going to be moving tonight big time. And he's like, why? And I go, that moon's coming up. I said, it's going to get good in like 30 minutes. And then all of a sudden, just bam.
There.
And he's like, are you kidding me? And I said, no, that's, for me, that lunar magnetic pull affects whatever. I'm not a scientist, and I'm sure there's very educated whitetail deer people that could probably explain more to this or tell me parts of this equation that aren't necessarily accurate. But I just know, as a whitetail hunter, I look for cold fronts too, but I also look at like what time of the days is this going to work. And one year, I did. You can look it up on my YouTube channel. I did kind of a personal challenge, and I called it the Workers Whitetail Experiment.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm certain I did. I think it was like, it was during my Hoyt, like
I think it was.
towards the end of,
I think it was
you know,
2018 because
yeah,
You didn't allow yourself to go to a stand until 10 o'clock. Is that right?
yeah,
Yeah.
I only hunted 10 to 2
Yep.
for a whole season.
I'm gonna have to go back and watch this.
Yeah, I only hunted 10 to 2 during the rut in the Midwest. I literally walked in when normally my skin would be crawling,
Yeah.
you know. Um, but yeah, Danny, I did that, and I did it. The full moon had peaked, and so I'm like, okay, I'm only gonna hunt, like, let's say I have 5 hours of vacation. I got to take my kids to school. Then I got to drive home. I got to pick them up, and then I got to get them at school at 3:30. Right. So I hunted. I thought it was 10 to 2, wasn't it, Evan?
I'm pretty sure.
But
And
yeah, I
this
ended
is
up.
during the full moon or the whole thing?
It was.
The entire.
I can tell you the date. Yeah, it was. It was the. That is the only way I was hunting the rut.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Like, literally, imagine like putting yourself in a penalty box.
Sure.
During the rut. So I'll find a picture of it, and I'll be able to tell you the date. Yeah, right. So, and I ended up killing. Yeah, I killed that whitetail right there.
I see. Is he a 12?
Yeah, it was
Okay.
and I killed him on a decoy, November 8th. And yeah, I think I shot him. Let's see, 10:33. I mean, here it
And
is.
what was the moon phase?
Full.
Mm-hmm.
It was full.
Yeah,
Okay.
I got into my stand.
Yeah.
And ended up getting in there, got a decoy out, rattled, and then
Yeah.
sure I smoke him right here somewhere.
For those listening, I'll be sure John sends us this clip, so it will be on the YouTube channel. So
Okay.
instead of watching John try to hold up his phone to the screen,
yeah. But no, this was and it was just such a fun thing because I was kind of like, I want to prove to people. A lot of people leave their stand at 10:30 or 11 o'clock.
Yeah,
Mhm.
for sure.
And during the rut, especially during this full moon, like, you just don't want to be there. Yeah, this was a self film, but I'm
Yeah.
sure I just
There you go,
stopped,
Wow.
smoked him right there.
Ooh,
So,
and
but yeah, it was one of those deals where I know how many people book the first week of rut.
November.
To them, rut in the Midwest with an outfitter. And I mean, you and I, we booked at the Rut and Struts and all those types of Pike County places back in the day. And you always were fighting for that first week. And it was either a buddy had the hunt of his life, and there were freaking a chain of bucks and blah, blah, blah,
Mhm.
or you're over there doing 13-hour sits and not seeing jack crap.
Yep.
And so that was just that lockdown phase, and it's so hit or miss. So I try to avoid that, and I pay attention to what that moon is doing. And this is going to be an awesome rut in the middle of November for the Midwest, because the full moon hit like a week and a half ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's actually not a full moon coming up at the end of October, which is pretty rare. Because normally this week I always fill one of my first tags. Like, my biggest deer normally comes from this week historically.
So I have another question for you.
What you got?
And just Evan kind of alluded to this earlier, and you said a little bit of something about it, but like part of my opinions, I have the most camera evidence from whitetails here in eastern Colorado.
Yes.
Now these aren't these are kind of western whitetails, and their habits are a little bit different than what you've got going in the Midwest. But most of the bigger deer aren't living on me.
Mhm.
Okay, that like the stuff that
Or
I'm hunting,
me,
they're
honestly.
they're not living here,
Yeah.
and I would say that sometime around October 25th, I will start to get the first that like and this is I haven't journaled this exactly, but just according to recollection, sometime around October 25th is when I start to see bigger bucks nighttime photos.
Mhm.
Okay. And then the first day walker photos that I'm typically getting, usually I can almost set them like clockwork. First 3 days of November, one of those big bucks will do a day walk through one of the properties. You know
Mhm.
what I mean?
Yep.
And
And it's
maybe
gonna be a one and
occasionally
done. Yeah.
just before a Halloween, maybe a couple days before Halloween, but
Mhm.
typically right after Halloween.
Yep.
And that's when I'm seeing it. And I've done a lot of hunts where I've traveled and gone out, somewhere in the Midwest and tried that last week of October. And I don't know if I've just been unlucky during that time, but the combination of all of that has given me a very negative outlook
Yeah.
on that October timeframe, like the 25th through the 30th, you know. Um,
Yeah.
so tell me what your opinion is there, and why I'm seeing that. And
Well, one thing we should discuss too is like people need to realize we're kind of at the same, you know,
Yeah. Same
would it be
line of longitude.
longitude?
Yep.
Okay.
yes,
Um,
yes,
so,
latitude.
yeah, so like if I were gonna describe this same type of season for like Mississippi, this would be like 1 month later. It would be
Hmm.
like, Christmas week, awesome pre-rut. Then all of a sudden you get into Christmas/New Year's week, in southern Mississippi, you start to get into some really good rut action. Bucks are on their feet throughout the day. So it's not like what I'm talking about now is going to work down in Alabama. You kind of need to know your window of rut. But the same principles apply if you know the phase, whether you're in pre-lockdown, rut, cruise mode, full eating frenzy prior to gun banging, and then you're in full skittish mode, and then if you have cold weather and food, then you're into full late season feeding action,
Hmm.
which can be good. So as long as you kind of know your window of time for that stuff, yeah. Here's the things that I would say play into your decision making on those experiences. My place here, like I've had cameras out since the end of August. And, I've got like a couple farms where I have permission. I have a little bit of land myself. I have another place I share with a game warden who I think Danny. Um, and yeah, I have not seen one single buck that I would shoot. And and honestly, historically, I don't.
Hmm.
When my cameras, and that's why, cameras are such a great tool for people to use if you exercise patience. Pressure is Minimal pressure kills big deer.
Hmm.
Period. The least imprint you have, the better you're going to be for being a big buck hunter, unless you're someone who feeds regularly and travels 100% on a regular schedule to where those deer are acclimated to the exact same thing every single day, which would be Lee Lukoski, right?
Yep.
Or Don Kiski or the
Juries.
juries.
Yeah.
I mean,
There's
100%. Like these guys have a routine, they do it every day, and they can do that. If you're not that, then you have to recognize of what a little bit of pressure can do, because that late October, as good as it is for seeing the first giant of the year, and listen, I know it's going to happen. I know
Hmm.
whether I'm there or not, I don't know, but like it's going to happen in the next 5 days. Something that I would shoot will show up by one of my stands.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's a spot where you're going where I think the pressure has already been there, you push that opportunity of a day walker into still being a nocturnal deer. And he's going to come scent check every bit of that to where he's going to know who the first doe that's coming in, where she's going to be, when he needs to come grab her
Mm-hmm.
and get her back to his holding area in his little safe zone. They'll do that, and they'll be more nocturnal when the pressure's high. And so I've written articles about, like, I do not shoot does. I will not shoot a doe until late season, or possibly like once my tags are filled and I'm like right coming up to gun season. So the best thing I can do right now, every single doe that's in my area is a magnet. The more magnets I have, the better my
better off
hunting will
you
be,
are.
because none of my places are buck holding areas. I don't
Right.
have bachelor groups. I might have some, but historically they're not the big daddies. They're,
Right.
I have a higher doe population, which means higher adolescent buck numbers, and those bucks don't get kicked and spread out of that herd until those big daddies come in and the does are kicking their fawns off. So, it can be very discouraging for people when they have areas like that. For example, in my area, let's say I can see 5 to 10 does a night right now.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, there's going to be this switch where I won't see a single doe on a food source, and you're like, what the heck is going on? And that is the indicator to me the big bucks are here.
They're getting after them.
And the girls do not want to be spotted,
Right.
So when it becomes vacant, that's when who I want to see is here. And and then at that point, like for me, especially if it's a little bit earlier in the season, I would say once this really cool November time happens, and yeah, there will be a couple day walkers, some big daddies on food, scent checking, definitely going to happen. Scrapes, rubs, anything within their core dominance area, great for mornings. But once that passes and the food plots vacate and you're literally like looking at empty land, you're wondering where the heck all the does went. That's when you got to get to the thickets and
dive in,
and start, honestly, start packing a lunch, and that's when, for me, 13-hour days is like the name of the game. Except when I did that one experiment, but I've thought about doing a different one this year. I've thought about doing one this year where either I only hunt mornings or I only hunt evenings. I was kind of thinking of doing a cool challenge where I really limit that window to, like, for the guy that maybe only has 5 days vacation and he can get his boss to give him 3 hours off every day. So I'm kind of like thinking that could be a really cool experiment too.
Yeah. That's interesting, man. I know that some of the best whitetail hunters that I know, this is their favorite time. Is that late October time span between the 25th and the 30th. It's their favorite time, and I don't argue with them. I just don't know whether I'm in a completely different situation or whether like one of the things you were talking about, the pressure. And here in Colorado, number one, we can't feed, we can't bait, we can't hardly grow a food plot. And we can't use cell cameras. So
that's right.
To check the cameras, I've got to go in and check the cameras. You know what I mean? Which is applying some pressure. And with, these cottonwood creek bottoms that I hunt a lot of times, I mean, it's not like you can sneak in there without being seen a lot of times. The odds that they're going to see you when you come in to check them is pretty good. And I wonder if that's part of what contributes to my experience here,
For
Yeah.
just
sure.
not
Well,
seeing them.
And I can tell you right now, this is a big tip and something everybody should, like, when I go to do my batteries and everything, like, here's a prime example. Today's Thursday. I'm going to be doing all this, I told you tonight. Tomorrow's Friday.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a chance someone close to me, has a really good deer they're trying to kill, and they're taking, they're going to start taking a couple vacation days. A Friday is highly likely.
mhm.
So I can tell you, when it comes to having to make an imprint to, like, move stands, check cameras, get a decoy in an area, to where it's not going to be super loud. I can tell you, it's Tuesdays or Wednesdays, it's windy or rainy, or it's midnight.
Well, and that was going to be one of the questions I asked.
That's the only
is
time I'll do it. So, like, right now, what I'm getting ready to go do, which is pretty much drive across every bit of hunting ground that I've managed to scrape together here in Iowa, it's going to be at midnight.
In the middle of the night.
Yeah, it's going to be at the middle of the night, and if at all possible, I'm on a tractor. Like, that's going to be the name of the game.
let the diesel engine go, because the
Yeah, let it
association
keep it
with it,
running.
right?
Keep it running.
So,
The combines are moving all night right now, and it's a great time, and if possible, be on a bike. If you don't have that option, a tire on the ground is just less tracks, less walking, so I think
Yeah.
any of that would be very, very helpful for anybody listening.
Yeah. No, that makes a ton of sense. And here where I'm at, it would be different, because these deer aren't used to seeing combines running or tractors running in the middle of the night or anything like that. What they're most used to seeing are ranchers probably coming in to check cows or check water.
Yeah.
And so it's, for me, it'd probably be smart to take a vehicle all the way to as close to the cameras as I possibly can and do it in the middle of the day.
well, and that's one thing too. Danny, you've gotten on me because my whitetail experience is very, very limited. But I hunt a lot of areas like you do, where you might have one big cottonwood bottom and it's surrounded by ag, or you might have some CRP. And one of the most successful hunts I had, I didn't have the opportunity to move a stand early or middle of the night, right? So I actually drove my truck all the way down through the pasture on the fence line, 5 feet from where I wanted to cross to go put this stand in. And I drove my truck all the way down there at 2:00 in the afternoon, left the truck running, walked in, hung my stand, drove back, and then literally walked right back down in there.
Yeah.
And had the best hunt I've ever had, because whatever was
That's
in
what
that
they're used
area,
to.
they were associating. Like, they still had cattle in there, and I knew, because I had talked to the landowner, that they were in there daily to check them, because they were getting ready to move them. They were getting things ready. They were around. And so that was going to be my best opportunity to capitalize on what the activity level was like in that area.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, if you're on a spot where you're hunting with someone, like, for example, I told you I've booked some hunts with Land Trust. If that farmer that's there is willing to take you out in that, old beater that he's got that has barbed wire and a bunch of pipes and shit that are rattling around in the back of that thing, that's making all of your hairs stand up on your neck as a whitetail hunter, that's actually what those things hear all the time, and learning to like understand those types of things is important to me. And I remember the first time I heard, like, a chainsaw fire up, and I was just like, are you freaking kidding me? Like, I'm in here for the day and I'm looking at a neighbor 200 yards away run a chainsaw and those deer establish a comfort area,
Mhm.
and the movement still happens. It's just the movement happens in a slight bubble around that, but it doesn't shut down.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, sometimes the hardest thing is like taking that Murphy's Law that's happening and be able to embrace it. If you want to be a successful whitetail hunter, you just have to be there too. I mean, a lot of this is like trying to be surgical in our strikes,
Mhm.
but being in one place, I also tell people, hey, when in doubt, airport rule. Stay in one place for long enough and everybody in the airport will pass you. If you
Mhm.
get on that conveyor belt in Denver and just start going up and down, half that place is on the same rotation as you and you only ever see half of it. You go there and sit at the food court, sit there long enough, find a Starbucks. Everybody's coming by that thing at some point in time,
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, airport rule, if you just are the type of person where you're like, I don't know all these strategies, I'm just going on public land, I got a tree saddle, hey, find a scrape, find a rub, find one place where you can see a trail that's got, a lot of, fresher tracks on it,
Yep.
and get on the downwind side of that thing and put in time. I mean,
Yeah.
some of the best spots I've had, and honestly, that buck that I just showed you on that worker whitetail thing, that spot where I carried that decoy in. So this was another thing that was kind of cool about this, Danny, was because I was walking in every day at 10 o'clock.
Mhm.
That makes my hair stand up
Yeah.
because, you run the risk of bumping
Mhm.
any good buck
Well, you're
you want
usually
to.
walking out at 10 o'clock.
Yeah, and that's when action's good, right?
Mhm.
So my strategy for this was I hunted perimeters or roads. So that spot, I actually had parked on a road and I walked about 60 yards over this rise where you couldn't see the gravel road.
Mhm.
And I was able to carry my decoy in fairly quiet, get set up there, had the thicket within earshot of me so I could call there. But yeah, I've killed a lot of deer close enough to the road where you could easily shoot an arrow to it from the road.
Yeah.
So, don't be afraid of being on a good travel corridor, even if it crosses a road. Be off of it enough to where they're not running across there. But a lot of times those are good staging areas, 80 yards, 50 to 80 yards before where a big trail crosses a gravel road or a main road. They'll stand there and like look around. They kind of
Mhm.
like listen and look and listen and look, and that gives you a really good opportunity to to be able to prepare for a shot, or maybe get a grunt tube out or something like that. So you know there's certainly opportunities in not having the best whitetail spot in the world.
The first time that I ever killed a good buck in Iowa, first year that I ever hunted Iowa, and it was way over in western Iowa. I was hunting a public land piece over there. We had some private that we had permission on too, but this public land piece was pretty good. But there was a bunch of traffic. There were a bunch of guys hunting it.
Mm-hmm.
But over on this one end of it, I found this monster primary scrape that was like literally right across the road from a picnic ground.
Hmm.
And it was, God, it had to have been 20 yards off of the road, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And I literally, I looked at that thing and I forget what I did. I think I came and I kicked some stuff over it. I wasn't, this is like around 2000. I didn't even have a game camera, I don't think. And every time I'd come back, man, that thing had been cleared out. And finally I was like, screw it. I'm going to hang right here.
Yeah.
And I got up in that tree and literally I'm like, I'm kind of trying to hide behind the tree as cars are going right underneath me, dude.
Yeah.
And the first night that I sat it right 20 minutes before dark, all of a sudden I hear a loud grunt right behind me, and he comes running in and just starts working that scrape. But everyone else on that little piece that I was hunting at the time was headed way back into the back.
And
You know
that's
what I
so
mean?
true elk hunting too. The
Oh,
amount of
way back
people
into the
that,
back.
yeah, the amount of times you get to the front of the trailhead and everybody's trying to go so deep that,
Yep.
you know, they just
Walking right past the good stuff.
walking
Yeah.
past the good stuff. So you can never really rule that out. But,
No.
you know, I think during this time of year, being by, you know, don't hunt does. I tell people a big mistake you can make right now as a whitetail hunter: shooting a doe, shooting at squirrels, shooting at raccoons, like anything that helps pass time of boredom. You know, making a mission to like break through boredom at least twice in a day. And if you're like, okay, mentally, I'm going to break through boredom, when that happens the first time at like 9:15 in the morning, and you're just sitting there like, oh my God, I got to get till 11 o'clock. And then once it happens, be like, okay, there's one down. I have one more coming up. Hopefully it's later. And then about like 1:45, you're going to be like, Dudley said to sit 13 hours, and this is bullshit right now.
Yeah.
And just mentally, you got to say, oh, wait, this is the second one. I get past this one, then that's when I'm probably going to get my reward. And, you know, I just play little games with myself like that. You know, I tell myself, like, make yourself be hungry and get over it once a day. You know, bypass boredom twice a day. And when you do that, you know, I mean, there's certainly, like last year, I think I hunted 42 13-hour days.
Holy cow.
You know, to kill the deer that I wanted to kill. I saw him one time each month. I saw him one time at the end of October. I saw him one time in November.
Jeez.
December was gun season for the first half of it, and then I ended up shooting him on like January 8th, the last day of season.
Wow.
You know,
Well,
so
you know what? I have a feeling there was probably quite a few guys that just heard you say that who just said, I can't do that. I don't have 42 days to sit there for 13 hours. But I think the thing that they should take from what you just said is that the 7 days that you do have, the 8 days, however many days it is,
yeah,
13 hours, man.
I can tell
But
you
maximize it.
out of those 42, I can guarantee you there was never a 7 or 8 day chunk. And listen, I live in Iowa. You know,
Yeah.
I realize I'm in whitetail country, and that's honestly, that's why I'm here. But I also, like, people that know me know that I work as hard as I do throughout the year, and like work 2 and 3 shifts during the other time of the year, because from like August 24th to September 24th, I want flexibility in my schedule. And then from October 25th or 26th to November to Thanksgiving, I want that same flexibility. But what I'll tell you is, no matter which 7-day chunk of those 40 days, there were deer that 90% of the people would never have passed, that were great opportunities. I mean, I had, you know, this was a very personal thing with this buck. And honestly, I had a great year. I had a great year already. I killed a really cool buck on the very first doe, and so I kind of just told myself, it's all or nothing for this deer.
Yeah.
And
You were
honestly,
mad at him.
yeah, and it got personal. And but there was a lot of cool opportunities, and people who followed me probably saw a lot of times where I was posting like, I'm sure I'm going to kick myself for this one. But for any of my neighbors, you're welcome.
I've got a question about long sets.
Yeah.
So do you find it, personally, I don't have that hard of a time doing it in a tree stand unless it's really cold.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I have a terrible time doing it out of a blind. I don't care whether it's a box blind or whether it's a pop-up blind, but to me, it's two different things. In the blind, in the
It's
box,
solitary confinement, dude.
it is torture.
Yeah.
I mean, there are
Versus
places that,
being out on the playground. You know what I
dude,
mean?
especially a box blind, man, where you can't even hear the sounds of the birds or the, squirrels running around and stuff like that. I mean, if it wasn't for having an earbud in one ear and being able to either listen to podcasts or maybe even watch a little bit of some movies or something
Yeah.
on my phone,
Yeah.
I can't do it. Like it's actual torture. I don't struggle as much out of a tree stand. Do you?
No, I mean, tree stands are good. But with the blinds, honestly, I have two backpacks. One backpack is specific to when I go sit in a tree, and one backpack is very specific to when I go in the blind. So the difference
Mhm.
of those backpacks are I have a black cover suit, or an external cover zip
Yeah.
and black gloves and mask in there. I'll have a tripod on there versus a tree arm. But usually that blind backpack, I can take a laptop too, and I
Yeah.
do a lot of my writing.
Good. Some more.
I do a lot of my writing, and honestly, a lot of my content comes from when I'm in a blind and I'm like, you're stuck in that consolidatory
Confined.
confinement, and I'm thinking about a lot of stuff, and it's a very cool time creatively for me. So mentally, I've got to the point now where I'm like, okay, it's a good day to get some work done. Let's just get in a blind.
Mhm.
And a lot of times if I am in a blind, there's going to be a decoy with that situation.
Yeah.
So you kind of got to stay on your toes, because
Yeah.
you can look down for 2 seconds and look up, and there's already something like nose to that
Yeah.
thing, and you've missed your opportunity. So
Yeah.
that kind of forces me at times to do it. But there's certainly times where I'm like, I feel guilty about going out again, and I know that I need to do something. So in those situations, blinds are really nice. I look at a blind as a tool.
Mhm.
There's tools right now that whitetail hunters can use that, honestly, even though it's tedious, they're incredibly useful. The blinds are certainly one of them, because when it's extremely bitter, last year I had like DVT on because I had sat so long for that buck. So during the last 3 days, um, I wasn't supposed to be hunting, but I was on my back in the blind with my feet up out of the window for the last 3 days trying to kill that buck,
Hmm.
because I had to keep my feet elevated. So I just laid on my back, and it was like minus 32.
Oof.
I was just in
Mm.
there like in this little like worm position, just like trying to stay warm and eat some peanut butter. But I looked at it as a time to like be creative, come up with some new ideas, and be able to think outside the box. So that mentality helped me pass the time.
Mhm.
The other thing is, I personally use the HuntWise app. um, there's apps right now to where you can load so much information in there as a whitetail hunter, to where, well, I think actually my staff, I usually know, because my staff's like wanting to take time off, because there's a feature on here called like HuntCast.
Mhm.
So when you click on HuntCast, every one of my spots, I've pretty much put where that spot is. And it'll tell me like, right now it's like 10% chance of of something good. Now it's telling me in 3 days, like this is going to be 100%,
Mhm.
So like I told you, this time period's good. So like with this, I can load in my stand, the location, and you can put in like the perfect wind
Perfect wind.
direction.
Yep.
And with that, so it'll show me like, well, 1031, 99% chance that I am going to have a great encounter based on my primary stands. And that's actually based on an algorithm, weather change, time of year, phase of rut, wind direction for the main stands that you have, and also what the moon phase is doing. So, this is kind of showing, there's going to be some sucky days. There's going to be some Danny Ferris, I hate hunting October days,
Yeah.
but and it's hard to see on this with this screen right now, but there's also there's within these 7 days, there's 3 that are over 90% of having prime movement happening. And so, that's still a very, very good percentage. You're looking at 50% of the next 7. I have some very high probabilities based on that hunt cast. So, this app that I use is called HuntWise. And honestly, if you upgrade to the premium, you get a ton of like map layers and you get a lot of videos. I mean, there's stuff on here, how to acquire new land, food plots 101. Like they have some great videos on there. And I did a lot of, videos in there for people coming out of hunter's education that get that. But there's a ton of great apps that allow you to have the tools to be a better whitetail hunter right now. And I use that same app during my elk hunting as well, because even though I don't have stands located, I look at like prime movement times, and it can show you those windows, and the moon phase is part of that, part of that algorithm.
Well,
I'm looking forward to my vacation time then, because I went later in November. So,
yeah, you said you're going the 7th, didn't you?
Yeah, we're
the
gonna take off the evening of the 7th. The 8th is just gonna be kind of a recon day.
You go. This is for Kansas or
Yep,
Colorado?
this will be Kansas.
Ooh,
So
yeah. 10 to 18 is my favorite 8 days for Kansas.
Yep.
As a non local.
Yep. And there's the full moon is the 16th.
Ooh, see? And historically in Iowa, because like I said, I used to, for 5 years, I only had 5 days vacation. So, you start to you're on the phone with someone, and you're like, as soon as it's good, call, and I can just go into Joel's office and be like, hey, dude, I got to go.
Bye.
Yeah. If I were to hunt Iowa, and I only had 1 week of vacation, the 10th to the 16th, 10th to the 17th would be my times. That 10th to the 18th was always kind of my favorite for Kansas as a non-resident too. But there are there's a small window early, and there's also a small window late where giants are definitely there. But it's just a little bit more hit or miss. And the other thing I'll tell people too right now, if you're listening, like both of you guys are different. This is kind of a flip of the tides, because for me during elk season, I'm at the mercy of, booking a place to go or trying to schedule where my truck's going to be during what days, because I'm trying to go from Alberta down through Montana, Utah, New Mexico, Colorado. I'm trying to, wherever I can possibly get a tag, I'm trying to make that loop and kind of plan those days. You guys are coming here from out there, so you're like, what is my window of time? Most people don't have 2 weeks. So, I always felt like avoiding the lockdown is a good play for people. And if nothing else, look at that calendar, because like Evan just said, for me this year, if I were to had waited 5 years for an Iowa tag, I would definitely be looking at that full moon. And chances are, if I let's say I had 2 weeks vacation, and I wanted to use it, I would have came out here to do well, if I had 2 weeks vacation, I waited 5 years for an Iowa tag. I'll tell this to people that are listening. I would have applied for a spring turkey tag, which is a 4-day season in Iowa. I would have used 4 days to come here during the first 2 seasons, and I would have been able to look at the amount of traffic that's still in a designated area. And this is really important if you're hunting public land, because the foliage and the grass aren't here yet. And if you've waited 5 years for that deer tag, the spring turkey is such a critical recon time, because you can come in, you can see the old rubs still, you can find some sheds, you can even still see some old scrapes. So then you can go into your app and you can start pinning trees, whether you're a saddle hunter or whether you're going to hang some stuff. You can use those 3 or 4 days. And if you plan it on a weekend, you're talking about 1 or 2 days of vacation time to get a 4-day turkey season. Come here, do your recon, pin it, flag it, mark it, then take 2 to 3 days to try to get you like a 4 to 5 day weekend during this October lull, which I just talked about, to where you can come in, get your cameras there if you wanted, double check your signs, even get some limbs trimmed or whatever you need to do. Your hunting's going to be spotty. It's not going to be good all day. It might be good in the morning or it might be good in the evening, depending on weather and moon. But then now you're totally prepped to have a real solid 7 days during right now, Evan's week would be primo, and that would be 2 weeks of vacation for someone that waited 5 years for a whitetail tag, perfectly scheduled out to maximize your ability to shoot a real giant that you've waited a long time to have an opportunity at.
Well, that makes a ton of sense. We could keep going on this for like 2.5 hours, because I want to dive into like decoys.
Yeah.
Because I'm a giant decoy
There's
dude.
no time limit. I mean, the only thing I need is another can of Coke to drink. I'm not going out today. It's like I'm waiting 2 more days. Like right now, I'm just prepping gear. I got my quivers full of new broadheads. I've got my brand new 2025 Hoyt right freaking there that I can't show you. But yeah, you want to talk decoys? Let's do it. I love decoys.
Before we get off the other question, or the other subject that we were just talking about, I end up a lot of times on my out of state whitetail hunt, I end up sometime like during the first 10 days of November is where I'm going out, and I do hit the lockdown quite a bit. Now I've got some tactics that I really like to use during the lockdown.
Well, let's hear them.
And I've been successful
Teach me
with those. Well, that was the bow mounted decoy thing.
Oh yeah.
If I find a buck that's locked down on a doe, where I can get within earshot of him.
Yeah.
Boy, it's one of my favorite situations to be in.
Yeah. You two are both decoy experts.
Super vulnerable right at that moment. But the reason that I'm going during that time is because here in Colorado, my home deer hunt, the first rifle break happens like usually October 28th through like November 7th or somewhere in there.
Yeah.
So the first week of November is shut down for me.
And that's a big disruption, like we talked about, that can skew this information,
For sure. It can. But luckily, most of the places that I'm hunting, we don't have anybody rifle hunting on them. And even though your bucks can get shot on neighboring properties, oftentimes it helps push things onto those properties. But regardless, I'm shut down during that time here. So naturally, I end up doing a lot of my out of state hunting during that time.
Yeah.
And then trying to come home around the 10th or the 12th or something like that. So this year I'm in Illinois during that time. The biggest question is, in your opinion, during that lockdown time, first week of November, when the lockdown really starts to happen, when are you most likely to find a buck switching, turning one doe loose and running to start looking for another one?
11 o'clock.
11 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. If I were to, honestly, during the peak of the rut, if you only gave me 2 hours to hunt, I would hunt 11 to 1. Like
Really?
if someone like fully challenged me to only to, I would, well, I mean, I would want to be, I would say 10:30.
10 to 2.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. I remember, honestly, I remember killing, I was talking to Randy Ulmer one time. I was
Mhm.
hunting Iowa. I drew, this was back before Iowa tags were impossible to get. I had drawn 3 Iowa non-resident tags in a row.
Mhm.
And Randy called me and I was like whispering on my little flip phone and he's like, "Are you in a stand?" And I'm like, you know, "Yeah, it's November 11th." And he goes, and I said, I go, "I've killed a deer at 11:10 and 11:11 the last 2 days." And I like looked at my phone and it was like 11:10. And he goes, "Oh, dang, maybe I'll bring you some good luck." And like, I'm not kidding you, like 3 sentences got out and I'm like, "Hold on." And I put the phone down on my seat and Randy like heard me shoot this buck at 11:12. I had killed 3 bucks in a row, 11:10, 11:11, 11:12 a.m. And honestly, if I go back through like the amount of deer that I've shot during the 11 o'clock hour is insane. I stand from 10 to noon, like fully stood, bow on rack, back to tree, and I'm like, eyes are just on a swivel. When I look down and it's like 10 o'clock, I'm like, okay, time to like stretch out and get some of my movement out of my system. And then like as we approach 11 o'clock, I'm like, okay, here we go. I love that time. Love it.
Mhm.
okay.
And so that's always been a major question that I had because I've never seen anybody really talk about it or any kind of study being done on it. We know that that buck's going to stay with that doe, what, 24 to 48 hours, something like that.
Yeah.
And breeder as many times as she will stand and let him breed. And then at some point they are like, okay, I'm done with you. And they go to look for another one. And we're all trying to, if you're stand hunting, you're trying to be there when he goes on that new search or when he's in the chase phase of that new doe,
Yeah.
where she's not standing still for him, where she's still trying to get away and hasn't submitted.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always wondered when that typically happens, whether it can happen anytime or whether it's when they're hitting their feet to feed or something along those lines. But you're saying middle of the day is when they
Yeah. What I've witnessed, and I've seen it a lot of times. A lot of times I've gotten a stand and like the sun rises and all of a sudden you really start looking around and you're literally looking at bedded lockdown.
Mhm.
And you can grunt or do whatever and they're just like they're both zombies. You can tell that they've
Yep.
been doing their thing for a while, and it's almost like that buck went and bedded at a normal time that doe was used to kind of doing that morning routine and then laying down.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as he crushes that little power nap, that's when he's like, "I'm out of here," and
Okay.
then when he finds that new one, a lot of times he might join up with another one that's only on day one of that breeding cycle, to where that whole, instead of him leaving this doe, he's staying on the doe. Now they're starting their whole thing again, and then here's this new guy that left his doe. He comes in, and then that's when all that midday freaking chaos
Yeah.
starts happening, because buck one's been on her a day,
Yeah.
not
Right.
two. Buck two or three or four have been vacant. So, that's kind of when I've seen that stuff happen. But yeah, for me, that late morning, and even when Christian Berg drew a tag for Iowa and he came here with me, I'd got a picture of a buck in this one area like 3 or 4 days before, and then nothing. And I honestly, the very first day he was there, I took him to a spot where I'm like, we're going to see a lot, but we're not going to be in the action. I took him to what I refer to as an observation stand because it was lockdown. So I went to a high point on this farm to where we could watch a lot of what was happening in CRP and fingers and all this stuff. And we actually saw the buck on a bedded doe out in CRP like 500 or 600 yards away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they were really getting after it. And I just said, okay, in the morning, we got to get into that thicket, and we got to just be in there, because even if he's done with her tomorrow, he'll be on his feet for a little bit of time, and he's going to be prone to rattling or a grunt.
Mhm.
And that's, I think he shot his buck at like 10:30. Sucker, I just look over and here he comes, and he comes on this trail and makes a couple scrapes, and then he ends up shooting him on a main travel corridor going from thick bedding up to a very highly traveled like food corridor. So he was literally just going to try to get into where he knew things would feed at night, scent check that stuff, and pick up a track. So yeah, I love if I hear steps after 10 o'clock, I'm like,
Yeah.
I know it's got a rack.
Yeah.
Like, I know
Yeah.
it's got a rack.
Well, that's
And it's a great
interesting. That's
time.
good information.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 11 o'clock is like there's definitely going to be horns going together at 11, 11:30, 12, 12:30, 1, 1:30. Like there's definitely going to be some rattling sequences in my area during those times.
Okay.
Well, let's get to the decoy thing. How much of your season are you using a decoy?
As soon as I see that first lockdown happen,
Mhm.
as soon as I've personally witnessed a mature buck
On a doe
locked down on a doe, at that point, for me, and especially once the does have vacated, we talked about that.
Mhm.
I'm most likely going to have a doe decoy. Otherwise, I'll have like a one antlered buck decoy, something a little bit not fully.
Yeah, less intimidating.
Yeah, a little bit less intimidating. But yeah, I love my spots for decoying, and I normally decoy wherever I'm in a rattling zone. So I love to be in a small open place where the wind's in my face. There's heavy thickets or bedding, within 100 yards of me being able to rattle. And then I put my decoy at 25 to 30 yards in front of me, facing me.
Mhm.
And, that way something comes out, hits the opening. The first thing they want to do, the first thing's visual, second thing's nose, like happening every time. And then they're just literally coming downwind of that object. They normally like a 20-yard barrier, and it just puts things at 10 yards right in front of you, looking the opposite direction.
Well, I've been of course I own a decoy company now, but I've been a decoy advocate for a very, very, very long
Yeah,
time. I can't remember
highly effective.
what the first video was that I watched. It might have been Stan Potts and one of his earliest "Give Me a Minute" moments or something like that. But it was
That
I
dumb
watched him
looking
let the
stuffed animal
air,
thing he had.
like let the air out of one when it came in, just freaking puffed up like a
Primetime 4,
gorilla,
baby.
and I was addicted ever since, and it's one of my primary tactics
Yeah.
for hunting whitetails, and I think it's whether you're doing it, I'm not talking about the bow mounted side of things. That's completely different. I'm talking about 3D decoys, that you're hunting over out of a stand or a blind or anything like that.
Yeah.
I think that it is such an overlooked, underrated tactic that it's just ridiculous. And I mean, you're in the heart of deer country,
Mm-hmm.
and you live there for a reason. And a lot of guys, I know a lot of guys who are living in that part of the world, and they shy away from it. They think that they
I love that.
absolutely have to
Perfect neighbor.
ambush. Yeah, they have to ambush their deer, and if something, the risk of something going wrong with a decoy is just petrifying to them, and they won't even try it. And it's
Yeah.
like, man, in my opinion, you are missing the boat.
You can have some very negative experiences with a decoy. There's no
You can.
question. And, listen,
Does.
yeah,
Yeah.
you slap a decoy right in the middle of a food source,
Mm-hmm.
and you're going to be hunting over it during prime eating time.
Mm-hmm.
That's a problem unless you're willing to pony up and do it right. So I have 3 fully mounted deer that are decoys. And, one of them's the good old fashioned DNR robo deer that, has got a remote control and I can move them around. You can't use those here in Iowa. The others are just like fully stuffed. One's a fully stuffed doe and the other one's a fully stuffed buck.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, they're not like world class. If you've got anyone that's learning taxidermy, this is when you're like, hey, I'll give you $1,000 to like do a full mount
Mm-hmm.
on this thing for practice, because it doesn't like the stitching doesn't need to be awesome.
It needs to be effective.
But if you're talking about a full body decoy, there is nothing better than hair.
Now,
Like
I've
hair
got
to them is like insane. Now, I think with like the bow mounted stuff, when you're in a full, like you're in attack mode, that's very different than a static situation. But like with a fully mounted doe decoy with real live hair, and I leave like all mine go out and they sit outside right now. They're out for weeks.
okay.
So they don't
That
have
was where I was
human
about to
smell
go.
on them. Yeah, you
Mhm.
got to be careful about that.
I've got a full the first year I ever used it, I used it right in your backyard over at our buddies.
Okay.
And mine has detachable antlers, so I can run it as a buck or a doe.
Yeah.
And the first 6 years that I used that decoy, it was fire.
Yeah.
I mean, fire. And all of a sudden one year, I started getting more bucks that were winding that decoy from a long ways.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like if they were 50, 100 yards downwind of it, they would wind it. And I realized that hair had been absorbing scent all of that time. And
Mhm.
dude, I've done everything with that decoy, like thrown it outside. I nuked it for I don't know, a week straight with ozone.
Yeah.
I've done all kinds of things, but I can't get it out of it. It still seems. Have you ever experienced that?
I mean, yeah, there's certainly glues and like foams that could definitely have some kind of a smell, but I'll tell you what I do is right now, like you can normally tell when pre-rut's happening because it's when you're going to start seeing your first road kills.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a roadkill, I'm cutting hocks off.
Yeah.
Yep. Me too.
Like, I get out, I've got a pair of pliers and I've got a little, I've got this little plastic, well, it's right over there because I'm, literally got my stuff out for my all day sits.
Dude, I don't want to talk about this. We don't need to like share everything.
Yeah, and honestly, I normally put one hawk like right on the forehead and then one like on the rump. And and I'll use like a buck hawk even on a doe decoy, and it's really humorous to see when a buck walks up and like takes that big sniff and just looks at her like,
You're not the right one.
like I'm getting sloppy seconds here. Somebody's been all up on your face and butt like all night long. But it's enough to hold them. It's
Yeah.
enough to hold them, you know. And my experience is if you do have to use if you have to use a decoy in a heavily populated doe spot, the one antler buck is a good choice because remember, they don't want to be harassed by a buck. So a lot of times, even if they're like, wait a minute, that doesn't look right to me, they're kind of like, if I blow, everyone around is going to know there's a doe here. So they kind of like just, I'm not comfortable with the situation. I'm going to slink her out of here. But if you're in a spot where you know you're not going to have the high populace, and, you know, I really like, you know, I call them like little buck tornado areas. I've got like real thick cedar spots where there's no way to hunt inside of them, but you're just hunting the buck tornado that's just going around and going around. And by calling, you just kind of get them to pop out and look.
Get
And then
the
if they
eyeballs.
see that, they're okay. And in those situations, I've got the doe, and a buck is gonna scent check a doe. Like he's gonna do it, especially when the time's right. But make sure you've personally, you know, there's mature deer that are in lockdown phase, and a decoy is going to work
See,
very differently than when you try to force
yeah.
it, you know, and, you know, and try to have it out there when it doesn't work. But I
How
would,
much experience do you have with dual decoy setups using a buck and a doe?
um, honestly, only the times where I realized how big of a pain in the ass it was to do it, and
Well,
it
see,
is highly effective. Like it
I
is highly effective, and that's why I've got, like I said, I have the doe and the buck, because then you kind of got the best of both worlds. A doe will come out and be like, "Oh, I don't want to get in the middle of that." She just leaves and doesn't like blow the scene, and then a buck goes into full like, you know, in those situations, the hardest
well,
part is this gonna be a full demolition, like, before I can get a shot off? Because, you
well,
know, that'll
I'm
happen when the two of them are together, and that's why your bow mounted decoy works in that
see,
situation.
honestly, I mean, with the exception of when I'm going in on a buck that's locked down on a doe, when I'm going in on that, usually it's a bow mounted decoy, and it's going to be a buck. 110%, it's going to be a buck decoy.
Mhm.
But any other time, I mean, half the time that I'm using a bow mounted decoy, I'm using it in what I call the lockdown spread. And that is using a 3D buck decoy. And then I'm sitting over in the grass, within 20 yards of that decoy with a doe decoy on my bow so that I look like the bedded doe.
Mhm.
And even when I'm in a tree and I'm just using 3D decoys, I've gotten to the point over the years where I always want two deer, and I usually want a bedded doe and a standing buck.
Yeah.
And the reason is because it looks like a buck that has a doe in lockdown, number
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
And I get a completely different reaction out of bucks when they come into that than when they come into into a single decoy.
I would guess they're gonna be sneaky rather than
No, the
aggressive.
the younger bucks circle and try and get the wind of the entire setup a lot of times, and
Yeah.
they'll come in if they're in a position where they can't really go get the wind, they're going to come in timid, and a lot of times they're going to stay back off for a little while, and they're going to scrape or posture and try and look intimidating to get that buck to
Yeah.
leave.
Yep.
That's their first option because they don't really want to fight.
Right.
The older dominant deer take one look at that, and as soon as they pin their ears, they are screwed, dude. And they don't typically try to wind it. They typically march straight to the buck, and they are so focused on him
Yeah.
that the doe could be doing jumping jacks sometimes,
Yeah.
and they won't even look over because their mentality is, I have found a buck that has a hot doe. I am
Yeah.
going to deal with him, and as soon as I'm done dealing with him, then I will pay attention to the doe. So if the
Do
doe
they have
makes
to
a
see
little,
the doe first for that reaction to occur though? Like they
yes,
need to come in,
they
visualize
need
the
to
buck,
identify it.
then they kind of look around and be like, "Oh, there is a doe in the grass."
Yes,
And then
and
they go
once,
back. Okay, that's kind of what I was referring to. I could picture them like coming in and assessing that situation, and then, you know, once they realize like what's happening, then yeah,
yes,
then they're going to be like a turkey that, you know, where you have a Jake and a hen
it-
decoy. It's going to be the same type of reaction, but he needs to see both.
Yeah.
You
yes,
know, I would feel
he
like
needs to know the doe is there.
okay,
Yeah, yeah, and even when I'm using 2 3Ds and I'm in a stand or in a blind or something like that, it is just gigantic pain in the butt.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Because it's a pain in the butt to use one of them.
yeah,
But setting the two up, not only do I, and this is just my experience, but not only do I feel like I'm getting a better reaction out of the dominant deer, but I also feel like the does, instead of having more of a tendency to look over there and
yeah,
think, what the heck is wrong? Why aren't they moving or whatever? There's so many times where you see a lockdown where that buck is standing there motionless and the
yeah.
doe is just bedded down and he's just standing over.
They know what's
The,
up.
the does see it from a distance and they're like, I don't want nothing to do with them. I'm just going to leave.
Yeah, yeah,
And they don't even want to blow
yeah.
because, you know, so I get blown at a whole lot less when I'm doing that.
So do you have spots where you'll like stage both of those decoys up to where you're not really having to come in with that many?
Sometimes I'll only have sometimes sometimes what I do is if I'm going to be in a stand or something, I use a Dave Smith these days because my full body mount stinks.
Yeah.
My Dave Smith,
If I
I'm
had a
carrying in,
plastic one, that would be the one I would always use. The
Dave
Dave
Smith.
Smith
yeah,
decoys are amazing. I
it's
have
an
one.
amazing
Yeah, I have
decoy.
one. They're great.
And I have a sling that I use to carry it in over my shoulder, carry the thing upside down, and it's got that little stand so that I don't have to try and stick it into ground. I can
Right.
just put the stand down and slide him into wherever. And then a lot of times I'll use a two-dimensional doe and I'll try to find cover to where you know, just knee-deep grass or something like that, where I will put her on the ground right there just so that the top of the head is sticking out.
Yeah.
Because once they see it from a distance,
Yeah,
they
they put the puzzle pieces together pretty
they
fast.
write that doe off.
Yeah.
And once they commit to it, they're coming in and it's like a boxer in a ring.
Yeah.
All they're looking at is that buck and they're not even paying no attention to her. So if she's like a two-dimensional Montana or something like that, it doesn't really matter. And the other half of the time, it's me
Yeah.
behind a stalker decoy in that grass. And like I said, once they commit, once they pin their ears and they start coming, dude, I have had bucks that hung around for 35 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I literally play with them and I draw and let down and draw and let down and peek out this way in range and peek out this way in range just to see how much I can get away with
Yeah.
if it's a buck I don't want to shoot. And they are so focused on that dang buck that they don't care what I'm doing over there.
Yeah.
And I might be 10 yards from them.
And I think the times where like where you have a single decoy where you get that same reaction, I think what's happening is, and especially like my decoy spots, I have spots that these are my decoy spots. They're really groomed for this. And
Yeah.
the one spot where you actually saw that buck get shot earlier, there's a main road that crosses, or main trail that crosses the main road and then comes through this CRP grass, and then and then that little green patch is the first open to where they can see, so they're kind of blind until they pop out in there. And I think when I have the bucks that do that exact same thing, I think by chance they're on a doe's trail because they're like
Mm,
nose to the ground. So
hmm
in their mind, they're already like,
She's
there's a
there.
hot doe here.
Yeah.
She's
And
there.
then
I
when
just
they
can't
see the
see her.
buck that's stationary, they're like, okay, he's got her pinned down in the grass.
Mhm.
I just don't know
Yeah.
where she is. And then that same switch happens. And I think that's why these decoy plots that I kind of tailor, they kind of force that nature to happen, because
Yeah.
you know there is that CRP grass and the briars and all that, to where they're coming in nose of the ground, you know, trailing a doe that I know has gone from food to a bedding source. This just happens to be that transition area. So they're already like, I'm on a doe, and then boom, oh crap, he found her first. I think that's
Right.
kind of that mentality. And that's probably why my interactions are very similar, you know.
Yep.
Yeah.
At first methodical, but then, like you saw with that buck, as soon as he like looked, he's like, he has a doe here, I'm going to deal with
Yeah.
him first. And that, you know, he was just locked on that whole time. And I had to literally stop him to get my shot.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because back then, when I first got my full body mount, me and Bill Pellegrino
Mm-hmm.
we would run lone does a lot.
Yeah.
And you know, I thought it was awesome because every 2-year-old that came across it would come in and he'd breed her
Yeah.
and like breed her into the ground, and then, you know, he'd stay there sometimes for an hour or
Yeah. And you got to
something, you
get
know.
out there and fix your setup
Yeah.
and
I
stink it
know.
up.
But over the years, after 10 years of doing it, what I realized was every single one of the old bucks, the dominant mature deer that came in, and they ran downwind of that doe. Literally as quick, the fastest route that they could get downwind of her,
Yeah.
that's where they were going. And, you know, once my doe started stinking a little bit, my full body
Done.
mount, it was over instantly.
Yeah.
Like if I didn't have a shot when he was trying to get downwind, it was done.
Yeah.
But as long as I throw a buck in there near that doe, it's a completely different reaction. Those older deer don't even care about their goal, in my opinion, isn't to get downwind of that buck. It's to come in at the best angle to give him an advantage in kicking his ass.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I'll try it again too. For me,
Yeah.
I know when I
It's a
have the one
pain.
horn buck, I'm spending more time going and putting that thing back together and hoping that my full mounted decoy isn't destroyed versus
Yeah.
Yeah.
just juicy on the back.
Yeah, for sure, dude. For sure.
Yep.
I totally get it. And
Yeah. Last year, Jocko drew a tag and he was here, and, you know, night one, I had already seen a mature deer in this area on a doe, and there was a bunch of bucks like with him in this area. So when he got here on like November 5th. I just said, you know, we're going to take a decoy out, and we took a decoy out. And honestly, looking back, I probably should have let him shoot that buck, but it was like, you know, we're in there, rattle, buck comes out, sees a doe, and then it just turned into a X-rated film that was like going on. It went on so long, like Jocko's like, I'm actually feeling uncomfortable being in here with another guy watching this happen for this long. And I'm like, yeah, man, I'm sorry. Like, I don't know what to do. You would have thought this guy would have got the memo by
Yeah.
now that like, but no,
And
when the time's right, it is really fun. And I think, you know, before, even though we're talking about interactions, I think one thing we should say too to people that are listening, especially newer people to hunting, is educating your deer is a real thing. You
Yep.
know, and when it comes to calling, you know, calling is, in my opinion, there is an art to it, but if I see something that I really don't want to shoot, it doesn't do my area any good for me to rattle at it or grunt to it.
Fact.
You know, if
Fact.
exactly
you catch
right.
a flash of something, you're like, oh, that was antler. I want to get a look at this. That's understandable, but just realize that if you're a new hunter, this is the time of year where deer do respond to calls. And if you're going to, the first thing they're going to do is try to see where they heard that. And when they can't, and even if they do see it, or if they don't see it, the next thing they're going to do is they're going to go to their number one instinct, which is smell. And they're going to try to smell where that came from. And when you're getting busted, you're making an imprint. And, it's not going to, even though you might have a fun time passing time for this forkhorn to come over by your stand and sniff your peg and stuff, but eventually he's going to raise his flag, he's going to snort, and he's going to stomp out of there, and he might go 100 yards out and start blowing at you. And that is not what you want, because a big deer spends so much time looking and listening in a static position. You don't know that there's something 150 yards out that's been just eager to come right to you, but he's just waiting for that security. And that little bit is all it takes to like disrupt that whole thing. So, I wouldn't recommend calling deer you're not gonna you
don't have
don't
intentions.
have intentions to actually take a shot at. Don't educate the whole population, because a lot of people I have people that are like, oh well, yeah, you kill deer because of where you're at. Well, I've been where I'm at for 11 years, and a lot of what's happening is based on 11 years of discipline of, you know, not wanting, not walking through the place, not, I'm literally being disciplined in your execution to low imprint is part of what makes success too. So, going up there and ripping off a whole can of nose jammer, and then rattling at every spike that you see, and that sort of thing. It's fun to pass time, and if you're brand new to deer hunting, maybe you need to experience some of that stuff, and I can see it being cool. But if you're past that beginner level, not letting anything know you're there is going to increase your opportunity and increase your chances.
Let's talk about blind calling.
Okay.
And how much of it to do. So you're talking about some of your setups where you are like trying to get a decoy, and you're within 100 yards of a couple different thickets where you could have something bedded down, and you're hoping to call something out of there. And so that there is some times where you're doing some blind calling, and that, for those of you out there listening, I'm just referring to when you don't actually see a deer and you are trying to make something happen, hitting the rattling antlers together and throwing a few grunts out there. Now, my personal experience is I've had some really cool things happen blind calling before, made something out of nothing, it seemed like. And then I've had other situations where they came in the exact wrong direction where I needed them to come in from. And in some situations, like a couple years ago in Kansas, it was one buck in particular. And I was doing that lockdown spread I'm talking about, where I've got a bow mounted doe on, and I've got a 3D buck out in front of me. And it was in the wide open. There wasn't a tree around there. I was actually in some cut milo that was about a foot deep, a foot and a half deep. And then I was trying to call them. I thought that buck was going to be in this uncut cornfield that was kind of right next to it. I was trying to get something to peek out of the corn, and see the setup and bring them. Well, he heard it, but he was in the complete opposite direction and went in on the downwind side, and I didn't end up killing the buck that I wanted to kill. So what's your opinion on blind calling? How often you ought to do it, and whether you ought to be doing it at all?
Definitely do it. I do it probably every half hour, roughly. Definitely during a lull, I'll do it. And I'll give a couple tips for me. If anything close range is definitely going to be a grunt tube, not antlers, like, you know, a true blind rattle, or if I spot something to where I know my grunt tube, like I've got 2 layers of sound. Where the grunt tube stops, the rattling antlers will continue. So if they're within grunt tube, I'm going to grunt first. And not try to rattle, because when you rattle, I mean, they know exactly where you are, and they're gonna lock on you, and any movement that they see up in that tree is gonna be a negative experience, and it's gonna be a bad experience. So if I see something that's out there and it has a clear line of sight to me, I'm just gonna talk about a couple things that I would do. One, I know the first thing they're going to want to do is pinpoint location. The second thing they're going to want to do is get downwind of that location. Like, that is just nature. So if I'm sitting in a stand and let's say the wind's in my face and all of a sudden I see this buck like kind of coming down this way behind me, if I smack these horns together, all that deer is going to do is go downwind to me, even if it's 150 yards, and I'm busted. Like, that's it. So, like, if I know he has an easy opportunity to wind me outside of range, honestly, in that situation, I'm probably going to let him go. And I'm going to let him, you know, hopefully get like further downwind, or let him scent trail around and get to where my wind is favorable, to where when I rattle, he's got to come in a favorable wind position to me. So like, that's always going to be in my cards. The other thing is, if he can see me, I'm going to have my back to him, and I'm going to be rattling with the antlers in front of my body to where my body is blocking this movement and this flash, and I can look over my shoulders. And then you really want to have the ability to put your antlers together and put them between your legs and squeeze them or something like that, because it can happen like real
super
quick.
fast.
The other thing is, when I first get in my tree, I don't rattle or call until I have enough light to really fully assess what I've gotten myself into for the day, because there's been a lot of times during the rut to where I have something within earshot or something dangerously close to being downwind, that if I would have called literally blind in the dark, it would have been a negative experience for the day.
Yep.
I also normally don't call, like, unless I see a deer that has passed me and I have to get his attention and there's not a lot of shooting light left. I might make a call to that deer, but I typically don't rattle, you know, within 30 minutes of dark, because sometimes it could take that long for an animal to hear you, kind of get in the right mood to come your direction, and then all of a sudden they're like dangerously close to being able to see you or detect you, and now you've got to exit your stand, and that's just torched that spot. So first thing and last thing, you know, you got to have eyes on an animal. Maybe you're looking at something, you know, maybe you're looking at the buck that you want, and he just happens to be like walking upwind of you in a way. And maybe, you know, right about the time you think you can still see your pins, you can put out a light grunt or something. But typically, I'm not calling at the very beginning or the very end. It's normally once I know that I'm clear to call, and I definitely pay attention to wind direction when I'm calling an animal. The other thing you have to understand too is deer definitely have personalities. Some deer are fighters and some deer are not. And I've had at least a dozen deer that have been key target bucks that I've hunted for years. And the reason it turned into years is because it took me 2 times of making the same mistake of them being in a perfect position to hit some horns together and to get their attention, and literally they pick their head up and they're like, "That's a fight. I don't want any part of it." They're gone. So typically that type of deer, they keep those personalities,
Yep.
it's kind of like a grizz, some are going to come and some are going to run. So if you see a buck that, like, when he's out in a food plot and there's other bucks there and his ear forward a lot and he kind of like, shimmies and shakes out of other deer's way, that's not a deer that you're going to have success calling. But if
Yeah.
if you've got a buck to where when you've seen him, he'll lay his ears back or he'll like bluff another deer, that's definitely a deer that you would have opportunity to call and have success with. So, from blind calling perspective, I'm not going to blind if my main target deer is timid.
Okay.
I've screwed myself multiple times with that. I'm not going to blind call when I can't see or if I'm going to run out of daylight. Otherwise, I just want the wind favorable. If it's, within earshot, I'm going to start with a grunt tube. If
Yeah.
it's outside of that earshot, antlers are definitely my preference. And for me, about a 30-minute window is enough time for something to either come or
Yeah.
not come. And a lot of times, if I do that calling, let's say I do a call at the top of the hour, I might do a little series of grunting about 15 minutes after that. So literally, I've called long range. Maybe I
Yep.
haven't seen what I want to see, but he could be there just listening,
Yes. Yeah.
listening. And that's when, a huge mistake people make when blind calling is the movement after the call. Like, you have sounded a thing identifying your location. They want to identify what's there. So, I had one time where Ben O'Brien was here and I told him, like, we got in the stand at 11 o'clock and I said, as soon as we get in the stand, like, they're hearing something in the woods, I'm going to rattle. Like, are you totally ready? And he's like, yeah, I'll be ready. So I kind of said, I'm going to rattle. You ready? Yeah. So I'm like rattling. I'm literally rattling. My back's to the tree. I'm keeping everything tight. And I'm literally like looking this way, hoping he's doing the same thing behind me. And then, like, I can feel the tree moving and stuff. So I kind of look over my shoulder and he's out there like catching some freaking IG stories and shit. And I'm like, I go, dude, I go, do whatever you need to do. I'm going to pack it up for an hour. Like, I'm going to chill for an hour. But the next time I tell you we're calling, I want your bow in your hand. I want an arrow on it. I want you to have maybe even your rangefinder right here because, like, this can happen this
Yep.
fast or something can come in to where it's just going to stare at us for 30 minutes. And any movement you make is a critical error right now. And honestly, you know,
So in other
he
words,
kind of got the point, sat
in
down.
other words, call like you think it's gonna
Yeah.
work
Yeah.
every time.
Yeah, you got to be ready. You can't have your bow around the back of the tree where your easy hangers back there. I'm talking, if I make a decision to call, I'll stand up, I'll make sure my harness is situated right. Maybe I grab a few ranging spots that I just want to refamiliarize myself with. And, I honestly have it to where when I'm standing, my backpack is actually there and I've got my backpack open to where if I'm rattling and I've
You got
got to
edge.
just throw them in there, I can. Otherwise, I can put them between my legs and squeeze my legs. But like with that situation, honestly, I waited 1 hour and I said, okay, I would like to call again. Are you ready? And he's like, yeah, I'll be ready. And I literally hit those antlers together, starting in my rattling sequence. And then I just seen the white flash like coming through and I had to just stuff them between my legs, get the camera up. And I'm just like, I go, drawback, he's going to be right there at 20 yards. And literally that thing just came walking in and stopped to look around. And it was a 20-yard shot at high noon, day one with antlers. So be ready. If you
Yeah.
call, be ready and have a system figured out to where you can work within your own shape to get done whatever you need to do to get antlers away or a grunt tube in a pocket, to get a range up quick, to grab your bow and be able to draw back within your, like, anything you can do to do that is going to increase your opportunity as
Yep.
well.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think that a lot of how much blind calling you do depends upon where you're set up and how much potential bedding area or cover there is behind you on the downwind side.
Yeah.
Like even if if you're gonna, like you said, if you're grunting, then you don't really have to worry over about 100 yards.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But if you're rattling and you've got some potential stuff 250 yards, 300 yards behind you, you could pull
Yeah.
one out of there. And
Well,
they could
yeah.
come into the wrong side,
And not to mention
And
the really smart ones. Like, I had a deer that I hunted here for 5 years. I called him Demolition because through all the rut, he had one little spot, and it was actually in some CRP that was on a neighboring property. He would literally come into the farm that I was at, and he would just, I'd see him go into thickets or whatever, and he'd get a doe, and he'd take a doe to his spot, and he would get her in this little thicket, and he would sit on this knob, and I called him Demo because any other buck that approached, it was just smash time. And that was just his breeding spot. It was a breeding corridor that he used for years. And I remember, when I talked about some deer you can't call to, I remember Demo, and he's only 200 yards, on a neighboring farm. I remember this time, like, he came in, he got this thing, and he had this doe. The wind was perfect, and he was like looking the other way, and I'm like, I'm gonna rattle, like, I'm gonna get in his face, I'm gonna rattle right now. Like, everything was right, and I rattled, and that deer just spun around and, like, literally, like, looked right
your
there,
soul.
and then he freaking did like a 350-yard flank to get my wind. Like, that's how smart some of these are. So,
yeah,
if you are blind calling, like you said, it's best to try to get your back to a dead zone if you can. Because, yeah, with antlers, you never know where they're going to come from,
Well, and you're talking about that deer being really smart about that. And you made the point earlier where it's like, if it's not a deer you don't want to shoot, do not call him in.
Yeah.
Because that deer
he'll start doing
was
that.
probably one that had been called in a time or two.
Yeah.
And had figured out that sometimes when I hear this, it's deer. And sometimes when I hear it, it's the boogeyman.
100%. 100%.
So now he's going to do all of those things to go way around. Well, boys, man, this is a fun one.
I kind of want to go hunting now.
Longer. Yeah, dude. There's more things that I want to dive into here, especially I could talk about this for a long time, but I've got to bounce. I got to head out and go guide tomorrow. I got tons of things to get together this evening, and I'm going to try and sneak, a little evening hunt in.
Comes out. Now the truth comes out. Evan, have you announced the launch date, or is that still under wraps?
It's still under wraps. So, so for those listening, this will be a 2-part. So by the time you're hearing this audio, this will be part 2. We'll be 2 hours into this. We are set for sometime middle of November.
Right around then?
Right. I will guarantee you this. I will not be in the office on launch day. So if you want to go back and re-listen to the audio and figure out when I'm out, you'll have a good idea of when we're probably going to be launching.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, why are you going to split the podcast? I think let it ride, dude.
Because John
2 hours
Dudley,
and 15 minutes. We're gonna give you guys the best.
Just the way we roll. We break them up into about an hour.
All right, do your thing.
All right, dang it, I don't like this. He's a big shot. Like when
Rogan's
I was on
4
Rogan,
hours.
God dang, dude, we just talked until we were our vocal cords wore
Yeah,
out.
I got my catheter in right here. I'm just freaking like I can be here all day. What do you want to do?
I'm trying to stretch this as long as I can because I need the views to be able to go to my supervisor and be like, see, we're doing good. We're getting views on the podcast. We're getting the downloads.
Yeah, well,
So
good luck to you guys too, by the way.
Thank you.
good luck to you
Yep.
too, buddy.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had a awesome season. So thankful to be back at Hoyt, and honestly, we need to do one postseason, Evan, because there's so many little nuances of getting back into the Hoyt setups that's pretty cool. And actually, one thing I want to say is I am 3 months. Is it 2 or 3 months now? That I've been
Should be
shooting
3, I
this
think. Yep.
fully stock strings and cables, which is and center serving, which I think I did like 8,000 reps in July, August, or whatever it was, and then now this thing's been drugged from Alberta to Zambia, and freaking, as I said, what makes the difference is the durability.
Yep. And
Yeah.
Having something that's bulletproof.
Dude, I never changed my strings.
We've
out.
made some
Never.
updates to that system. We've developed our new process called the Wireworks.
Yep.
Man, I haven't changed my strings out on a bow from factory in 5 years now. They just keep getting better.
Yeah. Yeah, they really do. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Cool, dudes. Well, good luck. Send pics.
Good luck to you too.
Send pictures.
One of my favorite spots, and there's just a little story in closing. I went out to check it the other morning. I've got a game camera that's on this trail that's literally like I can jump out and it's 20 yards in, so it's not very far. And I can go and pull this thing, and man, it's been dead. It's been dead. It's been dead. And I was cussing October and everything. And the other day when I went in to pull it, I caught movement back through there, and it looked like a person. Come to find out, I went cruising back in there to see who it was. There's this neighbor lady, and her husband hunts too, but she's out there walking her 3 dogs. And I don't know who she is. I go up to her and I was like, "Do you have permission to be here?" And she was like, "Yeah, I'm so and so from across the road." And she says, "I walk my dogs out here every morning." And I'm like, "Oh my God, dang, dude! Like, please stop walking your dogs out here every morning." I was wondering, right on the edge of it, like a couple times I got pictures of dogs on the game camera, but never a person. And I just thought they were strays that were running around one day, but I'm hoping that she hadn't been walking her dogs the last few days.
I thought you were going to tell me she's like, "Old Jack just showed up with his ladies yesterday. I haven't seen him in a year." Like, usually that lady is the one that like knows the big ass buck that just sits there and looks at her. But yeah, that's a bummer situation.
Yeah,
it is, but
yeah, it's the way it goes.
Find out when she's there, and
it's part of the October curse, John.
Yeah.
All right. Hope everybody enjoyed it. We'll have John on plenty more. You'll get to hear us BSing lots.
I love it. All right, dudes.
All right.
Good luck. Good luck, everybody. Happy whitetail
See you,
season.
boys.
Yep. Good luck, guys.